project in film school. It was a documentary I was really, really proud of, something that I'd worked so hard on. I couldn't wait for people to see it. I knew they were gonna love this film. And there it was. The audience was about this size, or classmates, professors, everyone showed up. And I was sitting in the front row, about there. The auditorium is dark, my palms are sweaty, the film comes to a close, and it's my turn to run up on stage and take questions and comments. And before the lights could even finish going up, my classmate, his hand shoots up. And I'll never forget the first words out of his mouth. "I can't believe you made us sit through that." This film that I was so proud of, it failed. I failed to engage my audience. The film started, a bunch of things happened, then it ended. I somehow that year forgot one of the foundational tenets of filmmaking. If you want to engage your audience with a film, it's not about how gorgeous the shots are, how well researched it is, what a great concept it is, the editing, the screenwriting. If you want to engage an audience with a film, you have to have a story at your foundation. Software, websites, apps, services, I'll call them all products for short today. Products have a lot in common with film. If you want to engage an audience with your product, you have to have a story at your foundation. Now, you can lay this story down by accident, like I had done on my most successful films up until this point. And you can lay the story down by accident, like you're all undoubtedly doing on your best projects. Or you can lay the story down with meticulous care and intent, like this person here. This is Vince Gilligan. He is the creator of the TV show Breaking Bad. And what he's seated in front of is a story map for season 4 of Breaking Bad. Screenwriters know what I eventually learned to do was to map the story out ahead of time. Ideally with cards, on a wall, sometimes use Post-its. You gotta just make sure they stay on the wall because you're gonna move them around a lot. But screenwriters know that you map this out visually for all to see, so that you can do this. This is a close-up of a story card from near the end of season 4. If you've seen Breaking Bad, you know what this card refers to. If you haven't seen Breaking Bad, it's your first piece of homework. I love giving homework. I'm a teacher at heart, so go home, start watching Breaking Bad this weekend. What mapping story does is help you make things go boom. Possibly on screen, if that's part of your strategy, like if you've got a show like Breaking Bad, and absolutely for anyone on the other end, anyone in your audience. Now, in order to understand how this works for products, I want to first take you through how story works for something like a movie. So I'm going to walk you through one of my favorite movies of all time. If any of you haven't seen Back to the Future, we'll have a couple of spoilers here, but it won't ruin it, I promise. You can still, I think most of you have seen it, but in my unscientific survey, there's always maybe 2 people in an audience this size who haven't seen it. So if you're one of those 2 people, it's okay. Your homework is to go home and watch Back to the Future, but make sure you live tweet it to me while you're doing it. I love getting updates like that. Like, oh, I'm watching it, yeah, okay, this is awesome. So Back to the Future, how do the mechanics of story work? Well, first, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. On this x-axis of time, you have a structure. We call this a narrative arc. And on this structure, we have what we call plot points. So I'm going to walk you through it from the beginning. We call the beginning of a story an exposition. It's a fancy way of saying we're introduced to someone who's going to be a hero, and they have some kind of big, vast goal. So in Back to the Future, Marty, his parents are not so cool. He wants to make something of himself. And it's great because he's doing cool things. He's got a friend, Doc, and they have a time machine, and things are good. So that very early on in the world of a story, something can go change. A problem arises. Sometimes it's called inciting incident. What this does is it kickstarts, it calls the hero to action. This is what actually gets them to go on some kind of a journey. Now, in this case, Doc gets shot, and things are bad, and Marty has to figure out how to get out of the situation. He jumps in the time machine, and boom, he's back in time. Now, we're jumping into what we call rising action. It's called rising action because the y-axis here, what that stands for is interestingness or intrigue or action. The axis is not, it's not good or bad, it's just energy rises throughout a story, and then at the end, energy calms down. There's a lot of neuroscience behind this. I'll talk a bit about it today as well. The idea is that as humans, we don't have huge attention spans. And so we need to be kept engaged. So things need to get more and more exciting as action builds so that we don't get bored and want to put down the story. So in this case, Marty meets his mom, things get weirder and weirder, she has a crush on him, all this stuff happens, and all along, he's still trying to solve a problem that arose at the beginning of the story, which is he went back in time, now he needs to go back to the future. He needs to figure out how to get back home. Often adventure tales involve a hero trying to get back home. So rising action goes throughout, gets to the point near around 3/4 of the way through a story where the hero is so close to fixing their problem and a big bad crisis emerges. This is a moment where we wonder, will they or won't they succeed in solving that problem? Will they or won't they succeed in general? If the story ends here, it would be a tragedy. And luckily in our world, we're not in the business of building tragedies, so I'm not going to teach you how the mechanics of tragedy work today. I'm going to teach you how to overcome this. But what this moment of crisis does, it just keeps us fully invested in how the story is going to turn out. So in Back to the Future, he's so close to figuring out how to get back home that he's on stage, he's playing Johnny Be Good, and then he starts disappearing, and things just get crazier and crazier, and leads to a sequence of events where he needs to be born, and he has to get his parents to kiss, and it's great, he figures that out, but then he still needs to get back home. And so this leads us to what we call the climax or resolution. It's called the climax because it's the highest point in the arc. This is the point where there's a sword fight or some kind of explosions. In this case, there's lightning. Doc figures out how to power the time machine, and then they get things going. It's sometimes called a resolution because this is where that problem that arose early on in the story is resolved. But the story can't end there. Because imagine if they figure out how to power the time machine, and then the credits rolled. The end. It would be very unsettling. As humans, we need closure. We need to know where things are going to go and how things ultimately are going to end as the action calms down. If not, we get very frustrated. So what then? This leads to what we call falling action. The fancy French word for this is denouement. Literally means unknotting or unraveling, and in this case, of the tension. It is how the story comes to a close. So often the hero ends up going back home, and home is better than when the story started. The hero should be better than when the story started. They should have learned something. They should have grown. So in this case, Marty's home. Things are almost too good at home, which I'll talk about in a second. But Biff is like the family's manservant now, and he's got like keys to a truck, and it's like, wow, this is amazing. But so we wrap up here, and then it has to really come to a close, so we come to the end. If this was a typical Hollywood movie, he would see his girlfriend out in the driveway, they would embrace, oh my God, I had the craziest day, really? And then they kiss, and the credits would roll, and the end. But this is the start of what's going to be a sequence narrative. We call this a serial narrative. This ended up just being the first episode, and what happens is Doc shows up, and Marty, come with me, and where? To the future! And then if you were around in the 80s, I was a kid in the 80s, so we had to wait like 5 years for the next episode. It drove me nuts. Now they just film, trio films all at the same time, but man. So now you're wanting to know what happens next, and this is how human engagement continues over time. So this is for something like a movie. What about the things that we work on, the things that we build? So I want you to look at this photograph here. If I were to tell you that these two people are using an app that comes pre-installed on every iPhone, what What app are they using? You can just yell it out. FaceTime. So how do you know that? It took you all split seconds to answer that one. So what's going on when you look at a photograph? You start piecing together a story. You see these two people, you see, well, they're a little bit older, they've got a phone, it's in landscape, they're doing something photographic with it. Maybe they've got grandkids, and maybe they don't live near their grandkids, and look, they're possibly talking to their grandkids. They're so happy. That ability for your brain to piece together a story is so powerful that if you don't have the ability to do it, it's actually a debilitating disorder called dysnarrativia, the inability to parse or communicate stories. It's like amnesia. You literally cannot function in the world without the ability to use story. And it's so ingrained in us that, again, it took you all split seconds. You didn't even realize what you were doing in the moment. What scientists tell us is that on the flip side of the powerful brain ability to tell and parse stories, what scientists tell us is that if you were those two parents or grandparents thinking about FaceTime as a product or using FaceTime over any period of time, you were those two people, for you, life is a story. You use the same brain capacity to understand a 2-hour-long movie or a 5-year-long TV show or look at a photograph in a series of seconds. You use that same brain capacity to experience life every single day. And in that story, what's key is that you are the hero. So let me just pull that back up. Narrative parsing, we do it without realizing life is a story and you are the hero. So what our jobs are, and what I want you to think about, all of our jobs when you leave here today, is we're not designers, managers, oh, I do product, I do this, I'm a coder. All of that is great and it matters. But what I want you to start thinking of your jobs from here on out is you are all responsible for creating stories and enabling the best possible stories for anyone who comes into contact with the things that you build. We, by nature, want to be heroes in our own lives, and so it's your job to empower other people to be heroes with the things that you build, things that you put in front of them. So how does this work at the highest level? Using story to figure out how we engage with a product, how we think about a product. So what I'm going to walk you through is the first iPhone as an example. When it came out several years ago, about a decade ago, it could have been a story that looked like this. You might have been someone who listened to music on the go, made phone calls on the go. You might have had an iPod, mobile phone, or a Discman, if you remember those, like a book of CDs. That was a long time ago. Life was pretty good. So what was the problem? Well, if you were like me, you thought, well, it kind of sucks to carry two devices. Why can't we have a thing called the iPhone? It would be an iPod that played an iPod that made phone calls. And it would have been amazing, right? So if you start building tension into a story, which this is what makes all stories good, you would start seeing a few potential crisis moments arise, which is, well, you might have already owned an iPod, so do you need another device? You already owned a mobile phone, do you need another device? Was it going to be difficult to use? This would have been technically a smartphone device, and at the time, 10 years ago, they were impossible to use. And so most people, it was just a tiny sliver of the market that actually bought smartphones. Most people 10 years ago had those Nokia brick phones that did two things, made phone calls, and you could play Snake on it. And it was amazing. It was the coolest thing ever. So, and it would have been really expensive, this smartphone thing. So there are all these reasons to make you not want to adopt a device like this. And in the end, you have to ask, how badly do you want this two-in-one thing? How badly do you need to listen to music and make phone calls on the go? Now, if you look at the story as a piece of story architecture, what you see is that, this is the very technical term here, this is called anticlimactic. this story has no climax. It's a known problem and a known linear solution. I want a 2-in-1 device, I got a 2-in-1 device. So that's number one. The story lacks a little bit of something, lacks gravitas. So you can also look at stories in a different way. You can prototype this story. So this is a schematic that's in the US Patent Archives. It's, no one's sure if it was a joke or if it was anything that actually was pursued. The idea is that it's an iPod that makes phone calls. So if you remember the old iPod with the click wheel, this is how you would input numbers and letters. And in the English alphabet, we've got an easy one, 26 letters. You gotta find it and go for it. This would have been more difficult to use than a rotary phone. And that's not okay. That's a cliffhanger, right? So as the story builds, if people actually got their hands on a device like that, what happened is they would start using it as soon as you get to that point, oh, this is really cool, I can't, it doesn't work. The story doesn't complete itself. So what was the story of what the iPhone ultimately became? Well, you bring it up as high level as you can. Good stories are about big, big, big ideas, big human needs. So what do you need? I need a 2-in-1 device. If you keep asking why, you uncover the real reason. I need to communicate with the world around me. So, okay, great. 10 years ago, it was easier than ever to communicate. What was the problem? Well, the way Steve Jobs put it, smartphones suck. Now, you know, I just mentioned to all of you that smartphones were a tiny sliver of the market. Most people didn't have smartphones. And this is the language that he used in his keynote presentation when he introduced the iPhone to the world. So you see a little bit of playfulness here. The story I'm showing you is the story of what the iPhone became, and it's also the story of how he presented the iPhone to the world. Because once you figure out this kind of architecture, you can use it for not just building products, but for presentations and just pitches and talking about it to people. But so he's saying smartphones suck. So, all right, we got some tension building. I don't know, nobody wants smartphones, great. Apple has something for you, iPhone. It's a smartphone. Okay, so a little more dissonance. You've got a million reasons why you don't want a smartphone a decade ago. Don't want it, is it gonna be difficult to use, expensive, so on and so forth. So what did Apple ultimately build that was a contained, successful story? Well, at the top of this arc, what you've got is a device that they believed would be the best way to communicate with the world around you. It would work like magic, and it wasn't a 2-in-1 device like people had asked for. It was a 3-in-1 device. People wanted an iPod that made phone calls, and what they gave us was an iPod that made phone calls, and also this third thing they called an internet communicator. Which is so nerdy, but they joked about it. And so if you're a fan of Star Trek at all, that might sound a little bit familiar. Which, by the way, I'll talk about in my book at the end of today. But stories are prototyped in sci-fi movies. So if you ever work in high-tech products, I'll talk about websites today too. But you can often find these stories already prototyped in sci-fi because this is how screenwriters think. So, but yeah, what it did is it let you connect to the internet, which 10 years ago was just like the weirdest concept. We had WAP phones, if anyone remembers that, and then you could do text, and like you didn't even bother. So that's how they built something ultimately that people wanted. Now, it might have been it was only early adopters that bought the first iPhone. Those people would camp out in front of an Apple store and buy anything. Then second generation, more people. This takes time. It's not always something that happens right away. But over time, this became a device that even your grandparents use now to talk to their grandkids. So what you can do if you abstract this, every story at the highest level for a product is, you always have to ask who is your hero, what is their big goal, then what's the problem? Why can't they otherwise accomplish their goal? Then, what you need to do is introduce your product, and it just simply has a name and it has a kind of market category. Then you need to think about the competition because it's always there, and the more there's competition, the better your idea is. So this competition could be mental hurdles, it could be other competitors out there in the marketplace. At the top, what you've got is value and competitive advantage. Ultimately, what value are people going to get out of using this thing, and why is it better than the alternative? There's a takeaway, and this is just some kind of mental math of just, if someone's hearing about this for the first time, what do you want people to think? What do you want them to take away? Oh, I could see using that, or I'd like to learn more, or I'm curious. And in the end, their goal has to be met. And because this is the high-level conceptual model of a story, it's about not necessarily meeting the goal right then and there, but you have to have the promise of the goal being met. Oh, I see. If I use this iPhone, I could communicate with the world. I could do cool things. I can do X, Y, and Z. So this is at the highest level how story presents itself. The story then, it's not just a promise, it's not just something that happens in people's heads, it's something that needs to be embodied and experienced in every aspect of using a product and engaging even more broadly with a business and a brand. So if you take the iPhone as an example, that story needs to be echoed in something seemingly as simple as unboxing. And this is something that Johnny Ive talks about a lot, the theater of unboxing. They have a whole lab that's devoted to checking the story of this, and they have people opening things, and they're very, very meticulous about how that works. And the story then ultimately needs to be echoed in something as seemingly insignificant as UI. Although we know it's not insignificant, but the UI has to ultimately echo the story. Every key flow and interaction that people have with this they have to feel the magic, they have to feel like it's the best way to communicate, they have to be glad that they paid a lot of money in this case for this thing, for the chance to experience using the iPhone. So how does this work in something as seemingly simple, again, as a website, a web flow? So I want to take you through a flow from, this is a Twitter sign-up flow from several years ago that I love as an example of how story works because it seems so simple and it seems so much like the kind of basic stuff that we work on a lot, but the story is intact, and not only intact, you have the metrics and the business KPIs that were measured to, so that people could see the success of this story, because the important thing about stories is they're not just a creative endeavor, they're things that can be measured and things that can and should move your business forward, which is something I know in design capacity we talk about a lot, which is, oh, how do we get people to take us seriously? Well, we need to show results. We need to actually have data and metrics that back up all of our wonderful, great design ideas. So what's going on here? Well, at this time, Twitter was getting to be more successful. They were getting a lot of people to sign up for the service, but what they were finding is that people were signing up and they weren't likely to return and actually become active Twitter users. And so what they wanted to figure out is if there was a way within the first session to get people to experience the value of using Twitter. And so what you have here is you're on the Twitter homepage, and they're telling you who you are. You're curious about Twitter, you want to be in the know, welcome. And what is the inciting incident here? It's, we use this language, call to action, in our world that comes from storytelling. The call to action, it's a button. It's a yellow button. What's the problem? And what's the call to action? Sign up for Twitter. You want to be in the know? Cool, sign up for Twitter. Okay, so you click, and now you're in Rising Action. So what we have here is a series of screens that introduce us to the idea of what Twitter is and how it works. And each step has to be more interesting, more engaging, and more valuable than the last step before it. And again, this is why we prototype stories and we prototype flows and screens, because you can test this and make sure that it's working and make sure that it's reading like a story. So first you're introduced to a tweet, and then you're introduced to the idea that if you follow people, you will get more tweets, and you follow people and get more tweets, and you do this for a series of steps to the point where you might be, okay, you've done this several times, I keep following people, it's been a couple of minutes, which in the sign-up flow is like the longest time in the world. What's going on? You might be at a moment of crisis where you might be thinking, what's the point of Twitter again? What am I getting out of this? Do I want to keep going? And as long as you keep going to the next step, you ultimately experience what is the value proposition of Twitter. Now this step, it's the climactic scene of this story. It looks exactly like all the screens before it. I mean, it doesn't seem very different, but what we have here is suddenly you're invited to add your social networks, add your contacts, your coworkers, your family, your friends. Because Twitter, at least when this flow came out, it was a social network. It was about being in the know with not just famous people, Beyonce and Bill de Blasio and you know, Jay-Z, but it's about being in the know with everybody you knew. So what they tell you here is, hey, you can add everyone. And once you do, you'll see them. And then at this point, the rest of the story, it's almost inconsequential because it just needs to come to a close. You get more tweets. Now, wonderful, the end. You are home. And at the end of a story, just like a great adventure tale, the hero ends up coming home. And just like a great adventure tale, home needs to be better than when the story started. And home needs to remind the hero that they are better than when the story started. The hero has to have learned something and grown. And what you see with flow like this, and I've worked on a lot of projects where we've experimented with stories again from a metrics perspective, is Twitter, it was able to not just increase engagement, they ended up decreasing the amount of people that finished the flow, but the amount of people who did finish the flow were way more engaged and way more likely to return. And this flow was so successful that they ended up having to keep it live for years. And I'm sure if you were working on a Twitter team, it was infuriating because you couldn't get rid of that flow. It was so successful. Once they changed the way that that they saw their business, they ended up changing the flow, so now it focuses on other things. But stories work. We experience the story that the business wants us to experience, and we're more likely to engage with the service over time. So story can present itself in something that lasts for a few minutes. It can be in something that's just a few seconds. This is Fantastical. It's an iOS calendaring app. And what you have here is just adding an event, which just takes a few seconds and is so mechanical, that reads like a story. So at the beginning of the story, who are you? You want to add an event. All right, call to action, +, go. Now I start typing. What we've got here in the rising action is it starts parsing my words and smartly taking all of my words and then putting them on a timeline. So I start saying lunch with Elon in Palo Alto, and then it puts it on a bar. And then it knows the date, it adds Palo Alto, it adds the location. So as it's smartly doing that, I'm intrigued and I'm also learning and I'm getting something out of the experience. So it's not just about fancy animations for the sake of fanciness, but the story is moving forward. Now, I could be done with this, and I could, excuse me, be at the point that there could be a moment of crisis. I could hit done, and if this was the iOS calendar app, then the screen would just slide down, and I would be back where I started, and I wouldn't actually know if my event got added to the right date, which if you're at all me, like I'm adding things on the go, I would add things to the wrong date all the time and then miss meetings. But what you have here is when you hit done, now we've got another fancy animation, but again, you see it's not fancy for the sake of fancy, it moves the story forward. So what we've got here is the entire event, it starts folding in on itself. It goes onto the correct date, the 18th, and then it bursts red, and then it fades back out to white. And now, at the end, we are back home. Home is better than when it started. Your event is added to your agenda. I am better than when I started, and we're done. Now, one thing I want to note about flow like this is you could say, well, you know, this is so fancy, even Apple doesn't do this kind of stuff for a lot of their apps. Why should we do it? Now, the important thing about an app like Fantastical is that is their revenue model. You pay for the app. So if your value proposition is this is the best way to stay organized with your calendar on the go, you have to have stories built into how you're building your app so that people actually experience the value that you promise. That's why we pay for apps, and they've built a successful business on that. If you're Apple, you're not buying an iPhone because of the calendar app. So that app can be okay. Not everything has to be perfect like a story, but if it's essential to your business moving forward or to your team getting something done, you may as well look at the story and make sure that you're moving the user's story forward. Now, this was a few seconds. Flows can last even a period of days, weeks. In this case, I'm going to use Happy Socks as an example, which this is a flow that can start maybe on your phone. You get an email from them and they say, hey, we have a summer sale, we have socks on sale, are you curious? And if you're like me, you might think, I don't need more socks, no. And then a week or two later, you're on your desktop and you think, well, all right, I'll click through, maybe I'll get a new pair of socks. And so I start clicking through and then I see a pair of socks. Ooh, those are kind of fun. I don't know if I need a new pair of socks. And add to my cart. And what we have here is a really simple sequence, but what happens is the screen animates. If you add the product to a cart, that product box, it animates and then it goes up into the cart and then there's like a little burst. And if you ever see this, sometimes this something that other e-commerce sites use to extend the brand. In this case, Happy Socks, their brand is Happy Socks, Happy Feet. They make your feet happy. That's their value proposition. So animation here has to move that story forward. So, okay, buying a pair of socks. This is, you could look at it as episode 1, simple story. You can also extend it a little farther and think about, all right, once this ends, how does the story need to operate and function? So if you slice and dice it a little bit bigger, what you have here is a story that then goes as far as getting your email confirmation, which means that if you work somewhere where you're not in charge of emails, but the marketing team is, it means you're going to start having coffee with marketing people more, and they will love you when you start talking about this stuff. So what does this email do? Well, it's simple. There's like barely anything going on there. But what you have here, and this is marketing and content, folks, right? This is, like they already know this. The content has to move the story forward. So what you have here is simple language. It's like, we welcome you to the crew, Happy Socks, and you have exclamation points. And if this was a bank confirmation email, you couldn't have that. Like, hey, so happy, exclamation points, right? It wouldn't make any sense. But in this case, it moves the story forward. So I don't have as much buyer remorse. I feel like, all right, I want, happy feet. Okay, thank you, get my email. But there's more, because the story has to keep going. Right? And so eventually, a week or two later, you have to get your socks. So in this case, what we have here, there's a whole genre on YouTube of people unboxing, well, unboxing in general. Again, for a reason, there's a story behind it, and unboxing Happy Socks packages. So this person, he opens up his package and he's like, oh, this is so exciting, and he sees a card in there. And if you ever think sometimes when you buy things and you get it in the mail, there's a little card or a gift attached, and there's a reason. Or if you go to a party, by the way, this all works for parties. I love telling people I story mapped my wedding, and I hate weddings. Now I like them when I realize, oh, this is fun. But I have friends who still tell me, like, oh, it's the best wedding I ever went to. Like, you can use this for anything, meetings, kids. Oh my God, this works for kids. Like, you get them to do anything you want. Use it for good, only for good though, I have to say. But there's a reason why you get like a gift at the end of a wedding, or so I didn't get gifts, we had a bonfire. That was cool. That you'll get people to remember your party if you do that near the end. I'll talk a little bit again about science about this in a minute. But so you get a little gift and he's all excited, he's so excited, he knows to take to YouTube to talk about this. This person also, he's so excited about his car, and he takes to YouTube, and he's like, oh my God. And this person, he had, with his package, he got a ring. And he's like, I wish I could show you the video, but this is like a 10-minute video, and I'm not going to show it to you because it's so long. But he takes the ring out, and he's sort of like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings, and he's all like, oh, precious, and he thinks it's the coolest thing ever. He's so excited. But if you think about it, ultimately, what has to be the real climactic moment of buying a pair of socks? The socks themselves, right? So, he finally does pull out the pair, and again, another Golem moment, he strokes the socks, and he realizes, oh, okay, these are nice. And I'll tell you, I don't work for them, I don't get any money, but I wear their socks all the time. I have a pair on now. They're really nice socks. So, you know, the socks have to wear well, and you have to be happy when you're wearing them. Otherwise, the whole story is just a promise. It falls flat. So this is something that can take weeks or, you know, even years. Story can be really, really tiny and take no screens and no steps at all. Slack's onboarding, it's just a bot. You're chatting with a bot, and that reads like a story too. So again, everything is a story. What you want to do is reverse engineer, and so I'll give you this. I know some of you are taking photos. I'm going to list my website at the end of the talk. You can download all this like stuff, templates, and a lot of this, all this is in my book as well. So you can take photos, but if you want access to all this later, it is online. It's free to use. So the way you reverse engineer this is always ask again, who is your hero? What is their goal? What is their problem or incentive or call to action that what do we know that their problem is already, or what call to action are we gonna give them to move forward? Then there's a flow. Just every step has to be more engaging than the last. Know that there's always an impediment that could get in the way, and it's our job to make sure it doesn't. So things that could get in the way, it might be we require some kind of a sign-up at this point in the flow, or payment, or there's funnel drop-offs in our analytics, and we don't know why people are dropping off, but it's a cliffhanger. It could be just mental hurdles. People might be bored. They might be lacking value. We might have usability issues, and just, you know, we need to get people onto the next step so the story is complete. Ultimately, people have to solve their problem using your product, and they need to experience the value that using your product proposes. And then, at the end, this is when you think like a filmmaker, which is just, you just kind of wrap it up, just finish the flow, finish it as quickly as possible. If you remember Star Wars, what was it? I think it was Return of the Jedi, the new remastered version that came out several years ago. There's like that long 10-minute ticker. I know I see like, no long ticker tape parade. No long ticker tape parades. Don't do it. You know, they got to do it because they're Star Wars, but just wrap it up quickly as possible. Get to the end. At the end, the user's goal has to be met. And also, I talk about the users a lot, but the business goal has to be met. This is all measurable. Whatever metrics you're concerned with, whatever KPIs you are measuring against, these all have to be met. Again, stories are not just creative endeavors. They're important things that have to happen. So stories can be short. They can go on into infinity. The key with all this is engagement. Now, this brings me to a big question that I'm sure you have, which is, you know, why story? Because I could be telling you, hey, build your products like a game and you'll engage people. There's a lot of truth to that, but even game designers know that story, everything is a story at its core. So I want you to think about this for a second, which is there's no such thing as an actual experience. There are moments in time, and as I experience a moment in time, now I'm in this moment, but that's gone. Time is fleeting. And so now I'm in this moment, but that's already gone. And if our brains had to actually grapple with how fleeting time is, we would go insane. We would not be able to function. So what story does is it gives structure to all this insanity. It helps us understand what just happened. It helps us understand what's going on in the moment based on what just happened. And it helps us understand what's going to happen in the future. What scientists tell us is that when our brains experience anything that is structured like a story, our brain is activated. We're more likely to see the utility in using something because we can project a story of what will happen if we use this thing. We're more likely to experience something as being usable. What I've seen in testing a lot is that, let's say there could be potential usability issues, but the story is intact and people experience value at the end, they're more likely to still love your brand, still love your business, and let things slide. So when you're prioritizing features and functionality, if you ever have something that's like a bug and you're afraid to release it, if the story is still intact, you can release it and you can wait a sprint and fix it later. I hate to say it, but it works, right? So this is just how the brain spackles over some issues. You're more likely to see an experience as being desirable. We see what we can do something and we want to do it, we want to repeat it again. And you're also more likely to experience the value in having used something. Because that climax near the end, what scientists tell us is that there are peaks to an experience and lows. And we remember the peaks, we remember the lows, and we remember what came nearest towards the end. So if the peak is near the end, that's what people remember. And choice. It affects choice in the sense that if you had a great experience that read like a story with something, you're going to be more likely to want to repeat that experience over and over and over again. So the next time you work on anything, I want you to ask yourselves not just, what's my title, what's my role, what software are we using, what process, are all great questions to ask. But I want you to first ask yourself, what's your story? Who's your hero? What are their goals? What are your business goals? What are the obstacles? How is the story going to be great? How are you going to help people accomplish what they need to do? How are you going to accomplish what you need to do? How are you going to make things go boom? And lastly, possibly, make things last forever and ever and ever. If you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to grab diagrams, have this all in context, my book, The User's Journey, is out. You can find out more information and also grab cheat sheets on my website, donnalichaw.com, and I will be hanging out today, so come by and say hi. Thank you.